I spent 41 years building Hargrove Mechanical. Started with a second-hand truck, a few tools, and a business license I paid for, with money I'd borrowed from my father-in-law. By the time I sold it, we had 214 employees, contracts with the county, and a reputation that took 3 decades to earn. The buyer was a private equity group out of Charlotte. The wire transfer cleared on a Tuesday morning in September, $6.2 million, after taxes and the broker's cut. I remember sitting in my accountant's office when the confirmation came through. She slid the printout across the desk and smiled at me. I looked at the number for a long time. Then I thought about my wife, Irene. She should have been sitting in that chair next to me. She died 11 months before the sale closed. Pancreatic cancer. We caught it late. Too late. 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I still can't fully process the speed of it. One day she was complaining about back pain and thinking it was her old mattress problem. 8 weeks later she was in hospice. I held her hand when she passed, on a Wednesday afternoon in October, with the light coming through the window the way she always liked it. We'd been married 38 years. After she was gone, our son moved back in with me. His name is Vincent, and he was 34 at the time. He'd been living in Raleigh with a woman I didn't particularly trust, a woman named Shauna, but after Irene passed, he said he wanted to be closer to home, wanted to help me through it. I was grateful. The house felt like a museum without Irene. Every room had her in it somehow. A photo, a habit, a smell that was fading faster than I wanted it to. Vincent had always been the one who needed a little more runway than most. He was smart enough, charming when he wanted to be, but he never quite found his footing professionally. He tried real estate, then insurance sales, then some kind of online reselling business I never fully understood. Nothing stuck. I'd helped him out over the years, a loan here, a cosign there. I told myself that's what fathers do. Shauna moved in with him about 6 weeks after he arrived. I didn't love that, but I didn't say anything. I was 63 years old, living alone in a 4-bedroom house in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I didn't have the energy for conflict. Not then. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to when things started to shift. It was small things at first. Vincent would ask about the sale timeline. How close was I to finalizing? What were the tax implications? Had I set up a trust? I answered his questions because I assumed he was curious. He was my son. Why wouldn't he be curious? When the sale closed, he congratulated me, took me to dinner at a steakhouse downtown, and gave a toast about how proud he was. Shauna smiled the whole night. She had a smile that never quite reached her eyes. A few months later, Vincent started talking about a business idea. He wanted to open a specialty auto parts distribution center. He'd done the research, he said, had a contact who could get him into a supplier network. He needed seed capital. $250,000 to start. He showed me a business plan that looked professional enough, full of charts and projections. He said he'd pay me back with interest. He said this was the one that was going to work. I didn't say yes right away. I told him I needed to think about it. That night I called my old friend Arthur Klein, who I'd known since we were both young men, sweating through our first business licenses together. Arthur had retired from banking and spent most of his time fishing and playing golf, but he had a sharp mind and I trusted him more than anyone still living. I described the business plan to Arthur over the phone. He asked a few questions. Then he said, "Frank, does he have any other investors lined up?" I said I didn't know. "Ask him," Arthur said, "and ask him for documentation on this supplier contact. Get a name," I asked. Vincent got defensive. He said the supplier contact was someone he'd met at a trade show, that the relationship was still early. He said he didn't understand why I was making it complicated. I noticed Shauna watching me from across the kitchen while he talked. I didn't give him the money. I told him I wasn't ready to make that decision yet. He accepted it on the surface, but something cooled between us after that. 2 weeks later, I found a folder on the kitchen table that didn't belong to me. I almost moved it without looking at it. But something made me stop. Inside were printed documents, account statements it looked like, but they weren't my accounts. They had my name on them, but the account numbers were wrong. And there were transactions I didn't recognize, transfers, repeated structured amounts that looked like they'd been designed to stay just below a certain threshold. My hands went cold. I put the folder back exactly where I'd found it and went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed where Irene used to sleep on the left side, and always stole the second pillow, and I thought very carefully about what to do next. I didn't confront Vincent. Not yet. That was the hardest thing I've ever forced myself not to do. Every instinct I'd wanted to walk downstairs and put the documents in front of him and demand an explanation. But Arthur had told me something years ago that stuck with me. He said, "Frank, the man who tips his hand first almost always loses." I'd heard him say it in the context of business negotiations. Right then, sitting in my bedroom, I understood it differently. I drove to Arthur's house the next morning. I brought the documents. I'd photographed them with my phone the night before, careful not to move anything. Arthur put on his reading glasses and went through them slowly. He didn't say anything for a long time. "You need an attorney," he finally said. "Not a general practice guy, someone who handles financial fraud." He made a call. An attorney named Margaret Holloway, out of Winston-Salem, agreed to meet with me that week. She was in her late 50s, wore no-nonsense glasses, and kept a yellow legal pad in front of her at all times. She reviewed the photographs, asked me detailed questions about Vincent's background and habits, and explained what she believed was happening. Vincent, and likely Shauna, had been building a parallel financial profile using my name and certain identifying documents they'd had access to living in my house. The goal appeared to be constructing a fraudulent asset picture, possibly to secure loans or investment from third parties, using my credibility as backing. "How far has it gone?" I asked. "We need to find out," she said. "But Frank, what matters right now is that you don't let them know you know. Because if they know you know, they disappear. And then recovery becomes very difficult." I nodded. I went home. I made dinner. I sat across the table from my son and his girlfriend, and I made conversation about the weather and a football game and a neighbor's new fence. And I felt something harden inside me that I don't have a word for. Not hatred. Grief, maybe, with a purpose, over the next 3 weeks. Margaret and a forensic accountant she worked with, a quiet, thorough man named Douglas, pieced together what had been happening. Vincent had opened 2 credit accounts using my information. He'd been using a fabricated investment summary, with my name and the proceeds from the sale of Hargrove Mechanical as the supposed backing, to approach private investors, presenting himself as my business partner. He'd raised somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 from at least 6 different individuals who believed they were investing in a venture I was involved in. None of them knew me. None of them had ever spoken to me. The auto parts business didn't exist. There was a moment, sitting in Margaret's office, when Douglas walked us through the timeline, that I had to stop and look out the window for a minute. I thought about the 38 years Irene and I had spent building something real. The early mornings, the payroll anxiety, the years when we took no salary so our employees could keep theirs. I thought about Vincent as a boy, sitting in my truck while I ran job estimates, asking me questions about how engines worked. I thought about the toast he gave at my retirement dinner. Then I thought, this is who he chose to be, not who I made him. Margaret had contacts at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit out of Charlotte. The case was turned over to federal investigators. They wanted several more weeks of documentation before making any move. That meant I needed to keep living in that house, acting normal, for almost a month more. I want to be honest about how hard that was. There were nights I lay awake and went back and forth. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I'd misread something. Maybe if I just talked to him directly, everything could still be salvaged. Arthur, who I called every few days, was patient with me. He didn't dismiss the doubt. He just kept asking me one question. "Frank, what do the documents say?" The documents said what they said. The investigators moved on a Thursday morning in November. I was not home when it happened. Margaret had suggested I stay at Arthur's the night before, and I did. I drove past my own house at around 10 that morning, and there were 2 unmarked vehicles parked in the driveway. I didn't stop. I drove to a diner on Wendover Avenue and ordered coffee and eggs and sat by the window and watched people pulling in and out of the parking lot. My son was arrested that morning. Shauna was arrested 2 hours later at a storage unit in Burlington, where investigators found additional documents and approximately $43,000 in cash. The charges were federal, wire fraud, identity theft, bank fraud, multiple counts. A neighbor texted me that afternoon to ask if everything was okay, that she'd seen police at my house. I thanked her and told her everything was fine. It wasn't fine. I don't want to pretend it was. My son was in federal custody, and even knowing exactly what he'd done and exactly who he'd chosen to be, I drove back to Arthur's house, and I sat in his kitchen while he made us both a drink, and I didn't say anything for a long time. Arthur didn't push me to say anything for a long time. Arthur didn't push me to say anything. That's what 40 years of real friendship looks like. The case moved through the federal system. Vincent entered a guilty plea 8 months later, after his public defender apparently advised him that going to trial would result in a significantly longer sentence, given the documentation the government had compiled. He was sentenced to 7 years at a federal correctional facility in Butner, North Carolina. Shauna received 4 years for her role. I attended the sentencing. I sat in the gallery and I watched my son stand before the judge and listened to his sentence read aloud. He looked at me once when they brought him in, just for a second. I don't know what I expected to feel. What I felt was tired. A specific kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. The 6 investors Vincent had defrauded ranged in age from their early 50s to their mid-70s. Most of them were retired or close to it. Several had invested significant portions of what they'd described to investigators as retirement savings. Some of them recovered partial amounts through the asset seizure process. Others didn't. I spoke with Margaret about whether there was anything more I could do. She explained the civil recovery process. I hired her to represent the investors' interests in recovering what they'd lost. I covered her fees personally and contributed additional funds directly to 3 of the investors who had been left in the most precarious position. I don't say this for credit. I say it because they were people who had been harmed using my name, and I felt that meant something. Margaret suggested after everything was resolved that I consider speaking with a financial elder abuse advocacy group based in Durham. I went to one of their meetings. It was held in a church fellowship hall on a Wednesday evening, and there were about 20 people in folding chairs, and most of them were older than me, and nearly all of them had a version of the same story. A child, a stepchild, a grandchild, a nephew, someone they had loved and trusted who had seen their vulnerability, or simply their assets, and made a calculation. I went back to that meeting the following month, and the month after that. Eventually, I started helping with their outreach work, talking to seniors at community centers, at libraries, at assisted living facilities about how financial exploitation works and what the warning signs look like. Not because I think I have answers nobody else has, but because when I tell people my story in plain terms, without softening it, I can see them recognize something in it. And sometimes recognition is what saves you. My house is quiet now. Irene's side of the closet is still mostly the way she left it. I'm not ready to change that, and I've decided to stop feeling bad about not being ready. I still call Arthur every few days. I still drive by the building where Hargrove Mechanical used to be. It's something else now, a fitness equipment distributor. And I think about what it took to build something and what it means to be willing to lose it, rather than compromise the kind of man you are. I am 65 years old. I have $6.2 million. I worked 4 decades for. I have a son who was serving a federal sentence and who I haven't spoken to since his arraignment. I have a clear conscience, which I will tell you is worth more than people think, especially in the dark. And I will tell you one more thing, because I think it matters. People assume that when a man gets older, he gets slower, that he gets soft, that grief makes him easy to take advantage of, that he'll believe what he wants to believe because the alternative is too painful. Maybe that's true for some people. But I spent 4 decades running a business in a competitive industry, managing 200 employees, negotiating contracts, handling men who tried to take what wasn't theirs in boardrooms and on job sites. Age doesn't erase any of that. Loss doesn't erase any of that. The people who counted on me getting confused and sentimental made a mistake, and they are going to have a long time to think about it. I've had a lot of time to sit with everything that happened, not to make peace with it. I'm not sure that's the right word for what you do with something like this, but to understand it clearly without flinching. What Vincent did wasn't an accident. It wasn't desperation in the way people sometimes use that word to excuse things. He made a series of deliberate choices over a period of months. He looked at his father, a man who had just lost his wife, who was living alone in a quiet house, who had recently come into a significant amount of money, and he made a calculation. He decided that my grief made me manageable, that my love for him made me blind. He was wrong on both counts, but he was willing to bet everything on being right. That's not desperation. That's a choice about who you want to be. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in any mystical sense, just the plain practical reality that what you do tends to produce outcomes that match it. Vincent built something dishonest, and it collapsed the way dishonest things collapse, not from the outside, but from the inside. The documents he left on that kitchen table, the accounts opened in my name, the investors he misled using my reputation, none of it could hold. It was constructed on a foundation of lies about a man who was still very much alive and paying attention. The whole structure was going to fall. The only question was when and whether I'd be ready. And that's the part I keep coming back to. Being ready. I wasn't ready because I was lucky, or because I'm particularly clever. I was ready because 41 years of running a business taught me that the moment you stop paying attention is the moment you become someone else's opportunity. I had that discipline in me long before Vincent came back home. Grief didn't take it away. If anything, it sharpened it. Because when everything else goes quiet, what's left is exactly who you are underneath everything. Arthur used to say that character is what you do when no one's checking. I believed that when he first said it. And I believe it more now, because the moment that mattered most, the moment I found those documents and had to decide what to do next, no one was watching me. It would have been so easy to confront Vincent that night, to get loud, to tip my hand and lose the advantage. Instead, I took photographs, put the folder back where I found it, and went upstairs and made a plan. That discipline, that ability to override the emotional impulse in favor of what was actually going to work, that came from a lifetime of practice. You don't build it in a crisis. You build it before the crisis, and then you use it when the crisis comes. I also think about what it means to repair harm you didn't cause. Those 6 investors didn't deserve what happened to them. They trusted someone who was using my name and my reputation, and they got hurt. I didn't owe them anything legally, but I felt that my name being involved meant something, and doing something about it. Working with Margaret to recover what we could, covering what we couldn't, that mattered to me in a way that had nothing to do with credit or appearances. It was about what kind of man I want to be when nobody's grading me. Vincent is going to come out of Butner one day. I don't know what happens then. I don't spend much time thinking about it. What I know is that whatever he does with the years he has left will be entirely his own work. I gave him everything I had to give. The rest belongs to him. What I keep for myself is this. I did not let them make me small. I did not let them use my grief against me. I stayed sharp when it mattered. I trusted the right people, and I took care of the people who got caught in the wreckage. That's what I've got, and it's enough.